It started with a laugh. A cruel, dismissive laugh echoing through a quiet courtroom. Officer Daniels stood tall, arms crossed, lips curled into a smug grin as he stared at the man before him, an older black gentleman in a well-fitted military uniform, polished to perfection. But Daniels didn't see a hero. He didn't see decades of service or the weight of medals. He saw something else entirely, and he laughed. What happened next left everyone in that room speechless. Before we continue, if stories like this make you think twice about the world we live in, if they make you feel something, then consider subscribing to this channel. We bring you real, thought-provoking narratives that you won't hear anywhere else. Now, back to the courtroom. The man standing quietly in front of the judge was General Elias Monroe. Retired 4-star general. Decorated combat veteran. Advisor to 3 presidents. But today, he wasn't here to command troops or strategize national security. He was here because of a traffic stop. Earlier that week, in a small town just outside of Georgia, General Monroe had been pulled over for a broken tail light. It should have been routine. But it wasn't. Not when Officer Daniels walked up to the window. Daniels had a reputation. He'd been with the force for 14 years, never promoted, but well known for his aggressive attitude, especially toward people who didn't fit in with his view of respect. So when he saw an elderly black man in a luxury car, dressed plainly, he didn't think, retired general. He thought, trouble. License and registration, he snapped, tapping his flashlight against the glass. General Monroe handed it over without a word. You military? Daniels asked, squinting at the name. Yes, Monroe replied, calm, polite. Daniels smirked. Sure you are. He went back to his squad car and took his time. 30 minutes passed. Then 40. When Monroe politely asked if there was an issue, Daniels escalated. Claimed he was being non-compliant, asked him to step out of the car, and when Monroe asked for a supervisor, Daniels cuffed him. The body cam footage, which would surface later, showed no aggression from Monroe. No raised voice. No resistance. Just dignity. Still, Daniels booked him for obstruction and disrespecting a peace officer. And so, a week later, General Monroe stood in court. Not for a crime, but to clear his name. Daniels was called to testify first. He strutted up to the stand like a man ready to win. He told the courtroom that Monroe had been combative, that he acted like he was above the law. His tone dripped with disdain. He even chuckled when asked about Monroe's military status. I don't care if he says he's a general, Daniels said. Anyone can lie. That's when the courtroom turned. The audience, some veterans, some family, murmured uncomfortably. But the judge let it continue. Finally, it was General Monroe's turn to speak. He didn't shout. He didn't defend himself with anger. He simply stood, took out his phone, and said calmly, "Before I speak, I'd like to make one call." The judge raised an eyebrow. To whom? Monroe looked straight ahead. The Pentagon. Daniels burst out laughing. Loud, inappropriate, filled with disbelief. Who do you think you're calling? He shouted, still laughing. Monroe didn't flinch. He dialed. 1 ring. 2 rings. Then, someone picked up. Colonel Hughes speaking, said the voice on the other end. Monroe responded with quiet authority, "This is General Elias Monroe. I'm in court, addressing an incident. Would you kindly verify my credentials?" The courtroom fell silent. Every word from the speakerphone echoed. Yes, sir. General Monroe is a retired 4-star general, former NATO liaison, and presidential military advisor. Is there a problem, sir? Monroe glanced toward the judge. There was a question about my identity. The colonel paused. Would you like me to escalate this to the Secretary of Defense? Daniels went pale. The judge cleared his throat. That won't be necessary. And just like that, the power shifted. For a long second, the only sound in the courtroom was the faint hum of the ceiling fan. Officer Daniels stood frozen, his face drained of color. This wasn't just a man with a fancy uniform. This was someone with real power, the kind of power Daniels had never been near, and clearly never understood. General Monroe ended the call with a polite, "Thank you, Colonel," then turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I apologize for the interruption. I simply felt it was necessary to clarify a few things." The judge nodded, his expression unreadable. But those in the gallery, veterans, court staff, even the stenographer, were visibly shaken. This wasn't the typical courtroom drama. This was something much deeper. Daniels tried to recover. He mumbled about how he didn't know, about how Monroe didn't look like a general. But those words only made it worse. "What exactly does a general look like, Officer Daniels?" the judge asked, his voice suddenly sharp. Daniels stammered. I didn't recognize him. I thought he was." "You thought he was someone you could humiliate," the judge interrupted. "Because he was calm? Because he was respectful? Or because of the color of his skin?" The silence was brutal. Daniels had nothing to say. Monroe took his place at the stand and began to speak, not with bitterness, but with purpose. "I didn't come here to be praised," he said. "And I didn't call anyone to prove I'm important. I've stood in war zones where people judged me by my rank, by my decisions, not by assumptions. But today, I was judged before I opened my mouth." He paused, his voice steady. "That's the real issue, isn't it? That we still live in a country where dignity has to be defended. Where silence is mistaken for weakness. Where a man's history can be erased by another man's prejudice." The courtroom was silent again, but this time it was a respectful silence, the kind reserved for moments that matter. The judge leaned forward. "General Monroe, the court owes you an apology. This proceeding should never have happened. The charges against you are hereby dismissed." But that wasn't the end. The judge then turned to the district attorney. "Given what we've witnessed today, and the testimony Officer Daniels has given, I suggest an immediate internal review of his conduct. This court will not tolerate officers who abuse their power under the guise of authority." Daniels' jaw clenched. He looked around, but no one came to his defense. Not his fellow officers, not the DA, not even his own lawyer. As Monroe gathered his things, a young man in the gallery stood up and saluted. One by one, more followed, veterans, servicemen, even civilians. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was a quiet act of respect, a gesture earned not by rank alone, but by character. Daniels stormed out of the courtroom without a word. And for the first time, he was the one everyone was watching, not with respect, but with shame. Later that evening, a local news outlet ran the story. It spread quickly. "Retired general wrongfully arrested by officer, courtroom call stuns everyone." The footage was everywhere. People across the country watched that call to the Pentagon. They saw the arrogance of one man unravel in seconds, and the quiet strength of another reshape the narrative. It sparked conversations. About race. About power. About respect. But more than anything, it exposed a truth many try to ignore, that some men wear badges, and others carry honor, and they are not always the same. In the days that followed, Officer Daniels was placed on administrative leave. An internal investigation was launched, not only into the incident involving General Monroe but into a disturbing pattern of behavior. Years of ignored complaints, accusations of profiling, and repeated misconduct finally resurfaced. This time, there were witnesses. This time, the world was watching. The story spread far beyond that small Georgia courtroom. It hit national headlines. Commentators debated, communities reacted, and veterans spoke out, not in anger, but in solidarity. Not just for Monroe, but for every person who's ever been silenced or doubted simply because of how they look. And as for General Monroe? He went back to his quiet life. No press tour. No interviews. Just the same man he was before, composed, dignified, and uninterested in revenge. He never wanted to make a scene. But when faced with disrespect, he responded not with fury, but with proof, the kind of proof that leaves no room for denial. Because Monroe didn't just command armies. He commanded truth. And that's where the deeper lesson lies. In a world that still rushes to judge a man by the color of his skin before asking his name. In a society where silence is mistaken for weakness and uniforms are seen as threats instead of protection, General Monroe's story is more than just a courtroom incident. It's a mirror. A reflection of how easily power can be misused, and how rarely dignity gets the chance to speak for itself. How many people never got to make that phone call? How many were disrespected, dismissed, or destroyed by assumptions? Monroe reminds us that real strength isn't loud. It isn't violent. It doesn't need to raise its voice. Real strength stands still, and lets the truth do the talking. By the end of the month, the police department issued a formal apology. Officer Daniels was terminated. Mandatory anti-bias and ethics training were implemented across the department. It didn't undo what had happened, but it was a start. And for everyone who witnessed that moment in the courtroom, one thing became painfully clear: never underestimate the silence of a man who's led battles. He knows exactly when, and how, to win them. If this story made you pause, if it made you reflect on how we see others, how we judge, and how we respond to power, then subscribe to this channel right now. We bring you stories the world tries to bury, raw, real, and unforgettable. Leave a like if this moved you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And comment below, what would you have done if you were in that courtroom? We'll see you in the next video, where truth always finds its voice.